Hello, my name is Dave McGuire. I do a lot of presentation training, and many students and clients have requested I do a video, so that's my objective for today. So as I go through this, we'll talk about good, better, and best practices. I'll try and give people some options. Of course, most people don't like making presentations, and why? Well, obviously, it's a source of nervousness for many people. They don't like public speaking. That's the number one phobia out there, by the way. And of course, they're worried about making mistakes and perhaps being judged. So hopefully I'll give you some tips today to de-stress a lot of this so you can perform at your maximum. I love this quote by Mark Twain. There are two types of speakers, those that are nervous and those that are liars. So it's perfectly natural for people to get a little tight before presentations. So there's three things I'll go through in this presentation: delivery tips, some writing tips, and some tips for your visuals. So if we start with delivery tips, obviously the focus has got to be on you, the speaker. Everything you use, like slides and props, and by props I mean you may be doing a business presentation, you may be doing a product demonstration where you just need some props as part of your demonstration, your presentation. But the emphasis still has to be on you, the speaker. The slides are only there to help provide emphasis to your presentation and help make your points. So if you look at good, better, best practices, a bare minimum, I shouldn't even call it a good practice, a bare minimum would be to read a script and put up some boring slides. And of course, a lot of people need that script as their sort of comfort blanket so they don't lose their place. Much better practice, obviously, is to be able to present without a script and let the slides be there to support you. Now, if you want to get all the way to the best practice, present without a script, make a strong connection with your audience, and your slides are there not just to support you, but really emphasize the key points you want to make. So tip number one, obviously, is to speak casually without reading. When you read from a script, you become monotone, robotic, boring. It's so easy to lose people. And there's other tips I'm going to give you in a few minutes, like making eye contact. You can't do that if you're reading from a script. And of course, when you are reading without a script, you've got an opportunity to change your pitch and tone, which engages people a lot more than just a monotone reading from a script. And the more you can interact and engage with your audience, perhaps by asking them some provocative questions or throwing a topic out for discussion, something to get them engaged in the presentation helps a lot. And as I said before, when you're reading from a script, you can't make eye contact. Making eye contact with your audience is so important to make sure that they are engaged. You're actually able to make a connection with them. And I always have to remind people too, make sure you're making eye contact with many people around the room. Don't just focus on the most senior person in the room because they might be the decision maker. You're showing respect to everybody by making sure that you're making contact with many different people around the room. If it's 100 people in the audience, you can't connect with everybody. But if it's a small group of 8 to 10, there's no reason in the world why you can't make eye contact with everybody. And of course, you need to dress appropriately. But again, in this day and age, dress appropriately can mean very different things for very different industries. If a tattoo artist is going in and presenting a business plan to open a tattoo parlor, they're not going to dress in a suit and tie. But if you're presenting to a more conservative, say, financial institution, there may be an expectation that your dress is going to be much more formal. So make sure you're dressing appropriately. And watch your body language too throughout your presentation. And it's important as well, if you're making a team presentation, the people waiting for their turn to speak, to present, they have to be cognizant of their body language as well. Many people forget that people are still observing them, and they get a little sloppy in terms of their. The worst thing you can do is to be on your smartphone while you're waiting. And move around the room. And again, if you're reading from a script, you don't have that opportunity to physically move around the room, which keeps people's attention. Now, of course, if you're stuck behind a podium, you can't move around. But just because you're stuck behind a podium doesn't mean you can't make eye contact with people, doesn't mean you can't do things to engage them, doesn't mean you have to read from a script. The only thing that it does is anchors you to a podium. And of course, if you look at the photograph there, you can see one person looking up at the screen who's not really cognizant of his body language. And have a smooth transition between speakers. I've seen many groups where they sort of stumble and fumble through this because they haven't decided how they're going to smoothly transition from one to another. So you should either have a host who each time will come up and introduce the next speaker, or the speakers have to know what the protocol is going to be as they depart the stage, how to introduce the next speaker so that you've got that consistency. These are the little things that increase your professionalism significantly. Just as an aside, you obviously have to be very aware of any cultural sensitivities. We live in a global world and a global economy now where doing presentations to other cultures, other ethnicities, people in other countries it's a way of life now in many business communities. So you have to be concerned about images that might be offensive in another culture, even your pre-reads and leave-behinds. There's different standards for that in different countries. Images and colors can mean such different things in different cultures. Your body language, hand gestures, invasion of personal space. These are all things that making eye contact in some cultures is not welcomed. And people value time differently in different cultures too. So the only recommendation I can give to you is make sure you do your research so that you're not doing anything offensive in your presentation. So quick summary so far: speak casually without notes, change your pitch and tone, interact and engage with people by moving around the room, make eye contact with everybody in the room, dress appropriately, watch your body language, have a smooth transition between speakers. And of course, be culturally aware, and that's going to require a little bit of research on your behalf. Okay? These are all best practices in terms of delivery. One of the most important recommendations I can give people is make sure you practice. There are many benefits to practice that I'll cover in a minute. I love this quote by Benjamin Franklin: "By failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail." Another one here from Michael Jordan: It's not the will to win that matters, it's the will to prepare to win that's important. Again, the importance of practice. And these people practice, people who really want to stand out in their profession practice to perfect their craft. Athletes clearly practice. Pilots, I certainly don't want to sit in an airplane where that pilot hasn't practiced for emergency situations in a simulator. Debaters certainly practice. Actors, especially live theater. Can you imagine an actor in a live theater situation not having done some practice and rehearsal? Musicians, if they really want to be on point, that whole that chemistry between musicians and everything being highly coordinated, that requires practice. Magicians and that sleight of hand takes a lot of practice. The point is, successful people practice. And I know people get busy in their business careers and sometimes they don't have time. But if we were in a face-to-face seminar right now, I could give you many excellent examples of where practice has paid huge dividends for either myself or my companies. And here's one tip. Try this at least once when you practice. Really exaggerate your pitch and tone. I did videotaped presentation practices as part of training sessions a few years ago. And I asked people to do 2 takes. I let them do the first video take on their own, whatever they felt comfortable with. Then we did a second one that was just meant more for fun and practice. And I told them to wildly exaggerate. Use motion with your hands and arms if you want. Change your pitch and tone. Sound a little bit more humorous if you want. Really exaggerate things. And ironically, every single person, when they watched their tapes back, preferred their second tape, where they really went out of their way to exaggerate certain parts of their presentation. Here's some very important benefits for practice. You get much more comfortable speaking without a script. You understand your subject matter better. It helps a lot with timing and flow. I've done many practices where I just felt it wasn't flowing properly, so I'd maybe rearrange some slides or take some bullet points out or add a bullet point here and there. Certainly gets you much more familiar with your material. And there's certain cases too where managing the equipment is an important part of that practice. You don't want to be stumbling and fumbling at the last minute, realizing that the equipment isn't as close as you thought it was going to be to your podium or wherever you have to present from. It helps you get familiar with the room, and I strongly recommend for people, if you have to make a presentation off-site at, let's say, a customer or a client's office, if you can somehow see the room the day before, just to be better prepared for the presentation that day. I've never met a client or customer who wouldn't at least let me in a day or a week ahead of time to see the room. And it gives you a chance to practice your body language and your eye contact. Practice absolutely increases your confidence, which in turn lowers stress and nervousness. So there's so many benefits to practice, I can't stress it enough. Okay, here's some logistical tips in terms of delivery. Make sure you arrive early. No client or customer is ever going to be tolerant of someone who's late. Even if you had a legitimate excuse, like you get stuck in traffic, there was an accident, don't take the risk, be there early. And know the room. I just mentioned a few minutes ago, the better you know the room, and knowing the room also means you can predetermine where you're going to stand, where your team will sit, and where you would like the people listening to your presentation to speak. So if it's a client or a customer, that may be places you want them positioned. You'd like to know where the equipment is. Are you going to use any props and easels? Where are they going to go? It's also important to know the lighting control. Many presentations you want to dim the front of that room for better contrast with your slides. You want to know where the sound controls are. You also want to be able to test your sound. There's nothing worse than doing a presentation, you're getting ready to show a really impactful video, and the sound doesn't play. So these are all reasons why it's important to get to know the room and to practice ahead of time. Even something like getting there early enough to make sure you know the Wi-Fi password. Many presentations nowadays rely in some way on the internet. So these are all these things that by getting there early, getting to know the room, will pay dividends. If you are really good, have an emergency backup plan. Technology can fail, laptop bulb, projector bulb, your flash drive might be corrupt. I actually, I tell a lot of my students and clients when I present, I had an instance where I had a client. They had this brand new facility. It was beautiful, but I was the first person using the room. So I got there half an hour early, and without telling you all the different stages, I actually had to resort to my fourth backup plan to be able to do that presentation. Took 20 minutes to go through plan A, plan B, plan C, and finally plan D worked. And because I had those backup plans, I saved everything. And by getting there early, I was still ready 10 minutes early before we had to start at 10 o'clock. So have a plan B, even if it's just having your presentation on a USB flash drive in your pocket in case something happens. I always travel to many presentations with my own projector in case the client's fails. Okay, let's now talk about some writing tips. Why do we use slides in the first place? Well, people remember 20% of what they hear, 30% of what they see, but your comprehension is much better when you can remember 70% of what you see and hear. So that combination of audio and visual is highly impactful. And frankly, that's one of the great successes of YouTube, is it combines audio and visual for an incredible inventory of do-it-yourself videos. So in terms of writing, we'll kind of go back and review what we started with here. If you want to do just the bare minimum, read a script and put up some boring slides, you're probably going to have, at least at a minimum, some short bullets and some visuals. If you want to get to the better stage and present without a script and have the slides support you, then you should have some visuals and some short bullets that come up one at a time. We'll talk about the importance of that as we go. If you want to get to the highest level, the best, present without a script, make a strong connection with your audience, and have slides that provide emphasis for your points, then you should have slides with some visuals, some short bullets, bullets that enter one at a time, and you have some emphasis either to your new bullet or you're de-emphasizing your previous ones. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Okay, writing your bullets. It's a strong recommendation that you should always use really short phrases, never full sentences that take long to read. Editing is hard, but I highly encourage people to be ruthless editors. You should always use a minimum 28-point font to ensure that it can be read from a distance. And here's an interesting tip. Older people have more trouble reading, so you should try and guess the age of the oldest person in the room and divide their age by 2 and use that as your font size. And you should always choose a font color that ensures color contrast. So if I were doing a face-to-face seminar right now, I'd say, what's wrong with that slide? Well, this slide violates virtually every rule on our slide. Tell me if this looks better. So you should always use very short phrases, nothing that's too long to read. Ruthlessly edit. I know it's a difficult thing to do, but you've got to be a ruthless editor in terms of getting rid of all those unnecessary words. You should use a minimum 28-point font. And again, here's a funny tip. If you really want to make sure that your presentation is legible to everyone in the room, try and guess the age of the oldest person in the room and then divide by 2. Use that as your font size. And you should always ensure good color contrast in the color of your font with your background. So does that look much better? If we compare the two, that was the bad practice, far too wordy. That's your better practice or best practice. Short phrases, and here's one of the reasons why. The shorter the better. in terms of comprehension rate. So if I do a sentence that's approximately 28 words long, on average, people are only going to get a comprehension rate of around 50%. If I can get that down to 19 words, it goes up dramatically to 80. 15 words, I'm up to a comprehension rate of 90%. If I can get it down to 8 words, I'm getting 100% comprehension because it's so much easier to read and comprehend. So that's one of the core reasons why we recommend nice, tight, short bullets. Here's another fun quote from Mark Twain. I didn't have time to write a short letter, so I wrote a long one instead. So you've got to be a merciless editor. Never stop, never fall in love with your own words. And this is actually a great little book if you can get a copy of it, Writing with Clarity by Robert S. Lee. He gives lots of tips on how to eliminate unnecessary words. I highly recommend it. Okay, here's the next slide. What's the problem with this slide? So I'm doing a presentation. I'm coaching people on presentation best practices, whether it's their delivery or their writing or their visuals. So what's the problem with this slide? Well, again, like the last one, I pretty much violate every rule I have listed in the slide. All of the bullets are all up at once, so people are trying to read ahead, and they're no longer listening to you, the speaker. Remember I said at the start, the focus is supposed to be on you, the speaker. These slides are just here to support you. So if you get too much copy on all at once, you've lost them. They're no longer focusing on you, they're focusing on a wordy slide. This should work much better. So the bullets only come on one at a time. That way the audience can't read ahead like the slide you see on the right there. That was the previous slide. They get a chance to focus on one thought at a time, and that thought being the most recent one that I've entered with. They're going to listen much better, and visuals can be used also to help make your point. We're going to get into that in the next part of the video. So this is a much better best practices, bringing the bullets on one at a time. If you really want to control your audience and have them focusing on you and listening to you, and having your bullets as visual support, you're going to be much more effective. And of course, you can use animations, whether you use PowerPoint or some other application, it doesn't matter. They virtually all have entrance animations. I like fade and zoom and grow and turn. A little bit of motion is always good to catch people's eye. That's why the best store displays with motion are much more effective than just static ones. They're much more dynamic. As long as you don't get too gimmicky. Gimmicky depends on your audience. I would use something like that bounce animation if I was presenting to school kids. I wouldn't use it in a professional setting. I do use fly in a lot, again, because of that motion. Here, it's appearing a little bit random. I tend to keep the fly in close to the edge that the copy is placed. So if the copy is placed close to the left, I'll fly in from the left. If the copy is close to the bottom, I'll fly in from the bottom, etc., etc. Okay, now if you want to get to the best practice, and this is difficult, this is where it starts to become very time-consuming. So even when I teach, a lot of my slides don't reach this level because I just don't have the time. But at a minimum, I make sure I've got impactful visuals, short bullets, and the bullets come up one at a time. But here, when I bring up the first bullet and I speak to it, then I'll bring up the second bullet and I'll speak to it. But you'll notice that the previous bullet has been de-emphasized. The font color changed to have less contrast, so your eye is focusing on the most recent bullet that entered. And the same and so on. The preceding line is de-emphasized, These are animation tricks that you can certainly find out from Microsoft help sites. I've even got some YouTube videos on how to really maximize your animations in PowerPoint. So this tutorial isn't meant to show you how to do that. It's just to show you the impact of learning how to do it. There's lots of tools out there to find out how you do it. And it does start to become a little time consuming. But again, if you're in a highly competitive presentation situation where there's a big proposal on the line, you've got to impress a client, you want to differentiate yourself from your competition and really drive home key selling points. These are the tips that can make a lot of difference. Okay, now let's talk about the use of images or visuals. There's that old adage, the picture says 1,000 words. So adding strong, relevant images can really reinforce the things that you want to say, the points that you want to make. And in some cases, you may want to consider using only an image. So here's an example. We've got a statistic. Research shows that 70% of preventable teen deaths are due to careless driving. What a horrible statistic. I could say that more impactfully with the visuals only and speak to the statistic that 70% of preventable teen deaths are due to distracted driving. I would talk to that while I have a very impactful visual behind me. Here's another example. I love this one. Benefits of e-commerce. Well, it gives you access to consumers all around the world. You're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And it's really convenient for consumers to shop from home. And you also have much lower operating costs. You don't have those overhead costs with a brick and mortar traditional store. And you can launch new products and new promotions fast. All you have to do is just post them to your website or social media. And you don't have any worries about handling cash like a store that might be open late and someone's got to transport that cash to deposit it in the bank. So tell me if you like this better. E-commerce is great because excuse me. E-commerce is great because I reach consumers all over the globe. I'm open 365 days, 24/7. It's very convenient for customers to shop from home. I have much lower costs. I don't have the same overhead costs as the traditional bricks and mortar store. It's fast. I can publish my products and promotions with the click of a mouse. And I don't have any hassles of concerns with cash. So again, that's just a more impactful way. And the previous slide was true to my other rules. They were all short bullets. They all came up one at a time. But I think when you see a presentation like that, it's much more impactful. This is a pet peeve of mine. I don't like white backgrounds on images used on a dark background. It looks too patchy and unprofessional. That would be a JPEG. You'd be much better off using a PNG that has a transparent background. You can see that that looks much more professional than that white patch. If you're stuck with the visual with a white patch, then just use a white background. Then nobody notices that patchy effect because it's white on white. Now we're reaching an even higher level where graphics are going to enter and exit. And again, this is difficult to do, and I certainly don't have the time to do this for every classroom lesson I do. I'm doing maybe 10 PowerPoint presentations a week. So I don't have time, but when it's really important, I do implement this. So you can see here that these graphics are going to enter and exit. So I have the number 1 associated with my first bullet. And obviously you use images that are complementary to the point you're trying to make. So I bring up another image, My third bullet point, again, has a complementary visual. But in each case, as the new bullet enters, one picture exits while another one comes on. And again, if you're looking at good, better, best, now you're reaching the highest level of really controlling your audience. It gives you complete control over your presentation. And again, it's just time consuming, but if you really want to differentiate yourself, if there's a big important proposal on the line, or you've got to make an impactful presentation to a prospective new client, these are the things that can make a difference. Okay, so to summarize the entire presentation, confidently deliver without a script. Practice makes perfect. That's an important point. Use short text bullets and enhance your presentation with lots of impactful images. And control your content, which means make sure you're only bringing up one bullet at a time, and exit or de-emphasize previous points as you progress. And again, I know that's time consuming, but if you want to be a 10 out of 10, those are all the best practice tips I can give you. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and be sure to look for my other videos on YouTube.